السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هل الاستفتاء على خروج المملكة المتحدة من الاتحاد الأوروبي سيدفع اسكتلندا إلى المطالبة بإجراء استفتاء ثان على استقلالها؟ مع النائب عن حزب العمال الاسكتلندي بولين ماكنيل من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. لعل حزب العمال المؤسس للسياسة في اسكتلندا باتت زلازل المواقف السياسية تهدد مستقبله في اسكتلندا، ولا سيما عندما تتعلق المسألة باستقلالها. فحزب العمال الاسكتلندي حصد النجاحات منذ بداية مشواره عام 1888 ووقف سدا منيعا في وجه المحافظين والليبراليين، وتمكن مع السنين من الفوز بمقاعدهم. وما هي إلا بضع سنوات حتى تمكن حزب العمال من التقدم الكبير والملحوظ وتشكيل أول حكومة أقلية بقيادة اسكتلندي عام 1924، كما أصبح الحزب الأكبر في اسكتلندا. وبعد 20 عاما استطاع حزب العمال أن يشكل أول حكومة أكثرية له. تجدر الإشارة إلى أنه قبل ذلك قام السياسيون من حزب العمال بأدوار قيادية في حكومة وينستون تشرشل خلال الحرب العالمية الثانية. حكومة الأكثرية العمالية تلك غيرت وجه اسكتلندا وبريطانيا، ففي 6 سنوات قدمت قوانين عديدة تتعلق بالمواطن والأسرة، كقانون التأمين الوطني وقانون الخدمة الصحية وقانون يتعلق بإنشاء خدمة رعاية شاملة للأطفال، كما وأشرفت على الانسحاب البريطاني من الهند. وفي الثمانينيات عندما تراجع حزب العمال على المستوى الوطني، ظل حزب العمال الاسكتلندي الحزب الأكبر في اسكتلندا لعقود، ولا سيما في السبعينيات والثمانينيات والتسعينيات ظل حزب العمال يحتفظ بمركز عال في الحياة السياسية الاسكتلندية على صعيدي مجالس المحافظات وويستمنستر، قبل تأسيس البرلمان الاسكتلندي عام 1999. وفي عام 2011 كشف الحزب عن أكبر سلة إصلاحات، إلا أنه منذ صعود الحزب الوطني الاسكتلندي عام 2007 بدأ يأفل نجم حزب العمال. وفي الانتخابات العامة لمجلس العموم عام 2015 خسر الحزب 40 مقعدا للحزب الوطني. أما في انتخابات البرلمان الاسكتلندي في أيار مايو هذا العام فخسر حزب العمال 13 مقعدا. يرى المراقبون أن ما قلل من شأن حزب العمال الاسكتلندي هو قراره في أن يصطفى مع أعدائه اللدودين، أي حزب المحافظين الاسكتلندي والليبراليين، في معسكر التصويت بلا على استقلال اسكتلندا. بولين ماكنيل النائبة عن حزب العمال الاسكتلندي تشرح من الداخل موقف الحزب من الاستقلال وإعادة الاستفتاء عليه، وتراجع شعبية الحزب في السياسة وفي الشارع الاسكتلندي اليوم. Pauline McNeill, member of the Scottish Parliament, welcome again to Min al-Dakhil from the inside, ma'am. Well, Pauline, before we move on to talk further about the internal politics in Scotland, especially after the referendum for independence back in 2014, I would like you to talk a bit about your presence here in Lebanon, in Beirut, as part of the Caring Scotland NGO, as a group of humanitarian volunteers who came all the way from Scotland to deliver aid to the Palestinian refugees and to the Syrian displaced refugees in Lebanon. Please.
I've been working with a wonderful group of people for the last year who felt they wanted to do something about the refugee crisis that exists across Europe and of course touched in Scotland. And so we began by making a trip to Calais in France, where there are many Syrian and many refugees from all over the world who are camped there in desperate conditions. So we made 2 trips there and we thought we could do some more good. So we remained together as a group and we decided to call ourselves Caring Scotland. And we thought, well, why don't we plan to do some other trips? And that has firstly brought us to Lebanon, where over the last few days we have been delivering aid to Syrian refugees mainly, but also some Palestinian refugees.
What caught your attention in the refugee camps in Lebanon?
The thing that catches your attention, firstly, is I would say the children.
The future.
The future,
Yes.
and they have no knowledge of what's happened to them, and you can see that they are slightly distressed because they know they're not at home. Many of the Syrians would come to ask how it would be possible to travel to the United Kingdom, and with very difficult questions to answer, because I can't answer.
Sure.
I would be the chief of the United Nations if I had the answer for them. But above all, I would say, perhaps an important story to tell is that a woman was crying when we went into a camp in Beirut, and we asked her why she was crying, and she said, every day I have been praying to Allah someone would come and help us, and when I saw you, we all have yellow jackets with Caring Scotland, when I saw you come in with the food parcels, I knew my prayers had been answered. So that made us feel that at least it was worthwhile.
The desperation, yes, the desperation of the
utter
people who are living on the hope of every day that somebody would come and help them. Where is your next journey heading towards? Do you have any idea, have you any plans for the future, Pauline, concerning Caring Scotland?
Well, at the moment, the plan is that we would try to travel to Iraq as soon as we can when we raised enough money, and we would do the same as we've done here. We would go to camps and cities where we could do some good and provide some aid, and really it's to show that the outside world cares. I mean, the food that we delivered this week only lasts a month. It's not very much, but it gives people hope that they're not forgotten about, and that's probably the most important thing.
How many refugees did you welcome in Scotland, Pauline, so far?
It's only been a few thousand. It's quite controversial. The country across the United Kingdom is split between people who think that we shouldn't take refugees, but in Scotland, I would say there's a majority for taking more refugees to look after, and I think that more centrally, I think it's important that the international community discuss how we're actually going to go forward in the crisis, because we can't go on forever trying to find homes for refugees when their own homes back in Syria or wherever they come from.
So the war must stop in Syria, the conflict must stop once and for all for the people to come back.
It is. That's what the international community need to focus on, and that's difficult.
Right, Pauline, allow us to jump now into Scotland and talk a bit about the referendum issue. On the 18th of September 2014, Scotland's electorate went to the polls to choose whether Scotland should be an independent country. And the result was 55% voted no, and you are part of the no, and 48% voted yes. Today, after almost 2 years, is Scotland far or close from independence? Because we've been hearing every now and then somebody saying that, well, let's have another referendum and let's check what the people want.
Well, firstly, I think it's important to note that Scotland decided no by 55% to 45%, perhaps higher than people had predicted. And the turnout was very high, and it has involved many Scottish people in taking a decision about the country's future, and has engaged probably more people in politics than ever before. So it has changed the country. It's still probably the central question for many people. Therefore, at the most recent parliamentary elections, only a few weeks ago, you can see, if you look at the voting patterns, people are still voting pretty much on whether they support independence or whether they support remaining part of the United Kingdom.
You come from Glasgow, and a majority of the Glaswegians voted for independence. What does that mean when the capital, Edinburgh, and 28 districts of the 32 districts, they voted against independence?
Well, I can only give you my interpretation, which is shared by
How do you
others.
understand the street in Glasgow?
Yeah. In my opinion, if you look at the poorer areas of the country, they tended to vote yes for independence. And I believe it's because a vote for independence represents change in the country for many people.
In terms of what?
In terms of from 2008 forward.
I mean, it's only a change for the sake of change, or they do understand the repercussions of an independence?
Yes, I think everyone has their own interpretation of what independence would mean. And the narrative that I believe that supports why this happened is that if you look to the European countries in 2008, and of course the United States, the financial crash had a massive impact on people's ordinary everyday lives, and it exposed the power of the financial institutions over their own lives. And I believe it fundamentally changed politics across Europe.
Sure.
And in Scotland, when you had the chance to ask yourself what's the future of my country, then many people thought we could change, we could remove ourselves from that system. And so I think that's one of the many reasons why in Glasgow, as a city that has still many areas of deeply deprived people who live in the city. And
allow us, Pauline, now to stop for a short break, and then afterwards we'll continue to discuss certain repercussions of the plebiscite. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. الشباب في 16 من العمر سمح لهم قانونيا بالتصويت في الاستفتاء على استقلال اسكتلندا عام 2014. بولين ماكنيل النائبة عن حزب العمال الاسكتلندي تشرح أهمية هذا الأمر، وهل يمتلك الشباب في هذه الفئة العمرية المعلومات الواضحة حول ما يصوتون له.
There's been campaigns over the years for 16-year-olds to have the opportunity to vote. In my opinion, I think the Scottish National Party thought that if they encouraged the right to vote among 16 to 18-year-olds, they would favour independence. And that turned out not to be the case. If you look at voting patterns amongst the age groups, that age group voted predominantly to remain part of the United Kingdom. But actually, in my experience, a lot of young people thought very carefully, and they really tried to learn as much as they could about the implications. And there was a big debate televised across Scotland where 16 and 17-year-olds were asking questions, and it was one of the most informative.
In this sense, and in the same context, in the aftermath of the plebiscite, a new Labour pressure group was launched with the aim to stimulate debate within the party's grassroots and wants a more radical approach to devolution and more autonomy to develop policies tailored to Scotland. Pauline, you have attended the inaugural session of this meeting of Labour for Scotland. What was meant by a more radical approach?
First of all, you would probably need to understand that although the Labour Party created the Scottish Parliament in 1998, 1999, itself, it didn't really correspondingly devolve the party which is based in London to Scotland. It also had the weakest offer to strengthen the powers of the Scottish Parliament. And there's many different opinions within the Labour Party about how strong devolution should be, and there are many people like myself and others who felt that Labour should have a stronger commitment to home rule, and that also means that our own party in Scotland has to be fully devolved from the party in
the UK,
based in the UK.
Yes.
And although those meetings are, goodness me, 18 months ago now, maybe longer, and they don't meet in that context anymore. There is some appetite for that discussion, but I wouldn't say it's at the forefront of everyone's minds at the moment, because we've just elected a new parliament.
Right. Right. Now, according to a report, and this is the issue also related to the issue of the financial crisis and the economic problems, according to a report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the deficit north of the border is proportionately 3 times that of UK as a whole. Did Scotland dodge disaster by voting to stay in the UK? Do you think this was the case?
Yes, I do. The case for an independent Scotland was partially based on the fact that we have oil, and that would be a huge resource for an independent country. And shortly after the referendum, as you will know, the price of oil has gone down and down and down. And so many people say that we would already have been independent by now, and our resource of oil would not be enough to fund all the commitments that Scotland has. And so yes, it perhaps even has changed people's minds the other direction.
You mean people from the SNP, the followers?
No, I mean people who may have voted yes, may be unsure now. To be fair, it could be either
both
way.
ways.
But the question of oil falling so dramatically is something that's been unable to answer for those who propose that we become independent.
Now, recent polls also reveal, of course you know about that the Scots would back independence in the event of a Brit exit. Like if the UK exits from the EU, then the SNP is going to call for another referendum, another plebiscite for checking the inclination of the people, whether they want to remain or to be out of the UK. What's the Labour Party stance in this regard, Pauline?
First of all, the Labour Party...
I mean the equation here, like if the UK is out of the EU, then you have the right to make another referendum for independence.
Right now we're campaigning for a vote to remain as part of the United Kingdom. There is some evidence to suggest that in Scotland that there may be higher numbers of people who vote to remain in Europe, but we don't know yet until the 23rd of June. There has been a debate, proponents being the SNP, the Scottish National Party, that they may be the case for a second referendum should Scotland vote to remain and the rest of the United Kingdom votes to leave. It is unclear what the position of the Scottish National Party is on that. I would expect that there would be an assessment on the 23rd of June about how Scotland voted in relation to the United Kingdom, because it will still be a very complex question.
Yes.
And I don't believe that there will be a second referendum proposed unless it's clear that the SNP could win. If there's another referendum and Scotland votes no a second time.
Yet we can sense that the SNP is always leaving the door ajar for a referendum to take place. And allow me here to read something from the manifesto of Nicola Sturgeon, the leader of the SNP. She said after the Scottish parliamentary elections in May 2016, quote, "We believe that the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum." So they are preparing the scene for it. "If there is clear and sustained evidence that independence has become the preferred option of a majority of the Scottish people, or if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will."
First of all, you are correct that the first referendum was offered on the basis that it would be for a generation. That if the United Kingdom seceded to give the power for Scotland to run the referendum, for the country to decide, it would be once in generation. Now they have gone back on this, and it has been said that it maybe they would propose it if Scotland voted to be part of the European Union and Britain voted to leave. It's very important to understand, and of course, as a Labour member of the Scottish Parliament, there's no one here to represent the Scottish National Party. However, most people would agree that internally within the Scottish National Party there are many members who constantly argue for another referendum and another referendum. So the leadership have to find ways always to satisfy the appetite of those who will always argue for an independent referendum.
Right, maybe they are still waiting for the circumstances, and maybe this circumstance is going to be given for them by, for example, the UK exit, Britain's exit of the EU.
There is no question in my mind that if the conditions existed for there to be a yes vote in another referendum, the SNP would argue the terms for that.
Pauline, one last question, if I may. I would like to ask you about the results of the parliamentary recent elections, Scottish elections. How did you read the election, especially with the fact that the Labour Party lost 13 seats while the Conservatives added 16 seats, and the SNP also, they had the highest number of seats?
The new Scottish Parliament, which was established 3 weeks ago after the election, means that no one party has an overall majority. So the Scottish National Party have the majority of seats. Labour have gone from the second party to the third party, and the Conservatives are now the official opposition as the second party. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, the issue of the election was still very much the question in the referendum about where you stand, whether you are a supporter of an independent Scotland, whether you wish to remain part of the Union. And I think that what happened was that there was a polarisation of opinions. So people supported the SNP because they support independence, or they thought the SNP would be a better government. But more importantly, many voters who would have otherwise voted Labour voted Conservative, Tory if you like, because they identify them as being the strongest party which support the Union of the United Kingdom. Yes. And I think that is the story of the election.
But how did you read this deterioration in the number of seats for the Labour in particular? Does that have any kind of indication?
My party has been losing seats for each parliamentary election. I think that the main reason that we lost some of our vote to other parties this time was primarily because the constitutional question, the question that was put on in the referendum, is still very much in the mind of voters. And it's not that people don't support the Labour Party and the values that it represents.
But maybe they want more radical, for example,
they want
approach.
To firmly have their opinion represented either for independence or for being part of the Union, and they identified those parties as being able to represent that point of view. So in other words, there was a polarisation of nationalist and unionist almost.
Right.
The Conservatives have been a party of the right. And most people agree that that is the story of the election.
The election results. Right, Pauline Mcneil, member of the Scottish Parliament, many thanks indeed again for joining us.
You're welcome.
You're most welcome, ma'am. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@الميادين.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.